So this is going to be a video that talks about how to get your guitar to overstrum on purpose. I don't typically record a whole lot of videos, so what I do know is I have a tendency to be wordy, so I'm going to try and keep things as kind of short and blunt as I possibly can be. Now, I've got a list of things here that you'll want to have as well if you're going to be doing a similar mod on your guitar. So things like you'll need a soldering iron. It's not totally necessary, but I would highly recommend having some flux. What flux basically does is it allows solder and copper or other wires to, there's kind of like a chemical bonding process, and flux allows the solder to integrate with that. So instead of just getting hard and falling off of things, it actually changes the chemical composition and almost makes like the metal become part of something else. So I'll show you kind of what that looks like a little later. You do need some solder. I don't know if there's any particular type. And I will stress right off at the beginning, I am not an electronics expert in any way, shape, or form. I don't know how to solder properly, so I know my soldering is going to be absolutely horrid. But I'm absolutely also open to feedback. So if there's techniques or things that I'm doing very, very wrong and you want to correct me, please do. I want to learn on how to be better at a lot of things. So if there's stuff that I'm doing totally wrong, let me know. This is just a flux brush just to spread the flux on things. I've got electrical tape. This is a T10, I don't want to say star. I don't know the exact terminology or the proper name. Let me see if you can zoom in on this or not. Yeah, there we go. So this is the six star kind of shape T10 screwdriver, and that's for the screws that are currently in both the Wii guitars as well as the Xbox 360 guitars. I'm using Les Pauls, but I'll show you that in a second. I am going to be using a digital multimeter, and basically we just use it to test resistance, but I'll show you that in a bit. And I've got something it's actually just napkin with a little bit of water on it, and it makes it wet to get rid of any excess solder that's on the tip of our soldering iron. So those are some of the things that you're going to need to do this mod. So what is the mod itself actually? So the mod is for overstrumming on a guitar. Now, I'm going to be doing guitar surgery on this Xbox 360 guitar. This is the Les Paul edition. But I've also done this on a Wii U guitar as well. So I've got this one that I got from a local store, one of those, like, well, in Canada it's called Value Village, but it's basically the Salvation Army style store. Got it for $6, so very pleased with it. And the idea of the overstrum is that when you strum down and you let go, sorry, the dishwasher's running in the background, I realize that audio might be picking up there. When you let go, what's happening is that it's actually moving past its center and actually triggering in the opposite direction. So when I strum down and let go, it's triggering on top. And up top, if I strum and I let go, it's triggering on the bottom. And so that's something that's really important to note, is if you want it to overstrum in one direction but not another, you'll want to set the sensitivity of the pins or the switches underneath to be more or less sensitive depending on what your preference is. So for me, I actually have a different one. I have another Guitar Hero guitar here. Another Les Paul. This one's another Wii one. This one, when I first got it, it overstrummed too much. So, like, through the fire, or not the Devil Went Down to Georgia, that big, very, very fast section towards the beginning, I could strum it like this, and it would go through the whole thing, and it was great. But then I would do things like, I'd try and do star power, so I'd hit this and try and, you know, do the star power building thing on sustain notes. But when I did that and I would let go, this letting go action, it was too sensitive. So it would overstrum when I didn't want it to. So there's a delicate balance between, you know, overstrumming and not. And I can already tell you, and you might or might not be able to see this, overstrumming on each one of these guitars is slightly different. And I don't know if it's a spring thing, but I can feel there's a significant difference. Like this has a much more solid center than this one does. This one feels a little bit more wobbly. So I'm going to see if I can maybe address that also. But this explains why these Wii guitars are so sought after. Okay, so anyway. The big secret is the connectors underneath and how they actually operate. So first thing we need to do, we need to take the guitar apart. So take out any batteries you have. I don't have any, so I'm just going to leave that off. Take the neck off. You don't need that for now. Take the faceplate off. Faceplate's off. I'm going to take these straps off. Now we take the guitar apart. So grab that T10 screwdriver, and we're going to take all of the screws out. Okay, there is a screw under this this warranty sticker. So this is going to be my zoom in camera here, if I can make this work. So this warranty sticker right here. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, okay, fine. There is a screw underneath there that you need to take the guitar apart, so just be aware of that. Alright, when you start taking this apart, don't just go ripping it, because there are, at least in the case of the 360 guitar, there's a couple ribbon cables. Let me see if I can get down here so you can see this a little bit better. There's some ribbon cables on the inside that are currently connected. And so what we want to do is we want to disconnect those. So one of them is actually the pin connector for the neck. Whoops. Yeah, one of them is the pin connector for the neck. And then the other one's actually the battery power supply. And so the battery power supply has this, I guess it's a capacitor. There goes a bunch of the screws. And this connects to, it kind of looks like a daughter board of sorts. And what we want to do is, I'll clean those up later. I just want to disconnect this power cable for the time being. There. So now that I've lost my screws, I'm just going to move those out of the way. So now we're looking at the body of the inside of the guitar. This, for the 360, and this is going to be different on each guitar, but generally speaking you have a lot of similar components. So this is going to be your wireless connection board. This is basically the brain. And this little piece here, let me see. This piece right here that I'm kind of highlighting with my thumb, this diagonal piece, is your sensor for tilt. As far as I understand, anyway. Again, not an electronics expert, but hey, sure, whatever. Now, when it comes to doing the overstrum, what we're actually worried about is this board or this piece in the dead center here. All we want to do is we want to take this off, and there's two, and they're kind of hard to see here. I wish I had a manual focus for this camera here. What we're looking at right here, there's two solder points for switches, and these switches are what register when you're strumming. And what we ultimately want to do is we want to desolder them. They're the exact same, but once we take them off, we want to desolder them and take them apart. And there's a piece of metal on the inside that we're going to manipulate. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory on what the overstrum is actually doing. Okay, so on the guitar, there's another screw. On the guitar, so as mentioned earlier, when you overstrum on the guitar, you need to figure out what it is that you want exactly. So do you want it to overstrum on the way up or the way down? If you want it to overstrum on the way up, meaning like you're strumming up, right? When you let go, this switch, because it's when you strum up, it's triggering the top switch. So, okay, and so if you look here, it says up, See if we can see that. Up, down, or DN. When we strum up, this is our up strum, that's going to trigger, and we want it to overstrum on the way down when we let go, which means this down one, this is the one that we want to be more sensitive. It's the other way around. It's basically the opposite. If we wanted it to be extra sensitive when we strum down and let go, the up piece, or the up strum switch, is the one that needs to be too sensitive, so to speak. Okay? So if you wanted to do star power, you strum, and then when you let go, you don't want it to accidentally overstrum. So you may want regular sensitivity on this down strum and oversensitivity on the up strum. And the irony is that it's actually backwards. It's when you strum up and you let go, the down switch is the one that you want to be more sensitive. We do need what looks to be a Phillips. So if you've got a Phillips kicking around, use that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, basically these 4 screws off. These 4 screws in the center actually hold a piece of plastic that keeps the strum switches in the same spot. So what I'm going to be doing is just taking these 4 off and see if we can take this panel off and probably remove these ribbon cables if possible, just for flexibility. So this comes off, but there's a lot of stuff that's kind of connected and in the way, and so I think the easiest way to make this actually make sense is going to be to remove this ribbon cable and this cable. Does that detach? That's a good question. Looks like it should. Well, we're going to remove it from this side then, because these ones definitely do remove. Sometimes they'll be glued in place. Like this one looks like it was glued at some point. But it dried out, shrunk, and then disconnected, so it's not technically glued in place anymore, so you should be able to just pull it off. Okay. So what are we looking at now? So this is our switches for strumming, our strum switches. What we're going to do is we're going to take off these screws and then pull this plastic plate off as well. I've taken these 4 screws out, and this piece comes right off. So this is our plastic guard, and all it does is it keeps these from wobbling. So you'll notice, maybe this is hard to see, maybe it's not. Let me see if you can see that. Here. Yeah, this camera sucks. I apologize for that. So, see how wobbly that is? The whole premise of this strum guard shield thing is when you put it on, it keeps this in place. So no matter how much we're strumming with the strum bar, it stops it from going anywhere important. Okay, so we've taken this off. So next thing we need to do is we need to on-solder the one that we want to manipulate. So in this case, for me, what I wanted to do is I wanted to desolder, or well, the one that I wanted to overstrum was when I strum up. So it's not the up switch that we want, it's the down switch. So I'm going to desolder the down switch so I can remove it and take this plastic piece apart. That's relatively hard to see, isn't it? So let me do this. There. That might be a bit better. So now, this is where we get our soldering iron. We're going to plug it in and let it heat up. I've been letting my soldering iron heat up a little bit. I'm going to see if it's hot enough. And one of the ways you can do that is just take a little bit of solder and apply it to the tip of the iron and just see if it melts or not. And it looks like it did. So that's nice. So all I'm doing is I'm getting any extra solder off the tip. Yeah, so I'm strumming up. I want it to overstrum when I strum down, so I'm going to take the down piece off. So I'm going to melt the solder here. There we go. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean the solder off of these tips as much as possible, because they have to go back in through little holes eventually. And so if this is all nasty and gnarly, you're going to have a bad time doing that. Okay, so that looks to be fairly clean. We'll set that off to the side for the moment. So that's one of our switches gone. So the next thing we want to do, yeah, see, this may be difficult to see, but there are tiny little holes on this circuit board, on this PCB here, and here, right here, and right here. That's where these pins need to go through. So I'm going to try and get some of this excess solder off, as much as I can anyway. So I'm going to try and more or less scoop it up, and that's where having one of those wicks would be really, really nice, because it would basically attach itself to the copper and you just pull it right off. In this case, you're heating it up and moving it around, and every time on a soldering board like this, so what you have a hard time seeing is that each one of these little holes right here, has what's called a pad, and those pads are what connect to those those tracers, I think they're called tracers, that go underneath the PCB. And if those pads come disconnected, that's bad. Every time you heat it up and cool it down and heat it up and cool it down, you increase the possibility of that very thing happening, especially if you do what I just did and leave the iron on too long in one spot. It gets too hot. And this is quite a hot iron, actually, but it's also a cheap piece of crap. A really good iron allows you to choose the temperature, which means you can do things like leave your iron on the same spot a little bit longer, which affects the solder, but not as much the pad on the PCB or the pressed circuit board. Okay, that's it. For me, that's good enough. I don't have a wick. If I did, there might be another technique. I don't know what it is. Anyway, good enough for the time being. So I'm just going to put my soldering iron off to the side. And now what we're going to be looking at is the switch itself. So there's a definite click. So if you listen, if I had known I was going to do hands close-ups, I'd gotten a manicure. Okay, so there's a definite click if you listen. Okay. The trick to overstrumming is having it set up in such a way that it registers, electronically it registers before the click happens. So what that means is that when you push in, there's a certain point where it will click. If you can get the circuit to register prior to the click, it means this button doesn't need to be pushed in as far before it's being registered as a closed circuit. And this is where our multimeter comes in. Now we've got a multimeter view that's also out of focus. Good fun. So basically what I'm doing right now is I'm in resistance mode, and it's going to be measuring the amount of resistance that is currently coming between these lines. So when I take these two lines and I tap them together, you'll notice the multimeter drops down to, it's basically measuring how much resistance there is in ohms. So right now there's 0.8 ohms of resistance. When I pull them apart, this one, as far as I understand, one basically means infinity. So there's an infinite amount of resistance between the two poles. What we want to do is we want to measure the resistance. It's not that we're measuring the resistance, we're simply using this as a way of indicating when the resistance changes in the circuit. So I'm holding these pins together. Here, let me do it this way. There we go. So I'm holding these pins together, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to push it in and see if it registers before the click or not. So if you hear that, so the resistance is kind of going a little crazy there. It's registering that the click is happening slightly, the circuit is closing slightly after the click. So if I click it just right, Yeah, so it's registering the resistance slightly after the click. What we want is for it to register before the click. So I want it to go in, and before it clicks is when the circuit closes. That's how you get Overstrum. So here's how you open up this kind of little cabinet. There's two flaps on either side. You pull these flaps out. My nails are terrible. If yours are also terrible, you may want to consider getting a flathead for this. A very, very small little flathead. So you can take your flathead, we're just going to pry that open slightly. Okay, there we go. There's the camera. Let's see. This is the ideal spot right here. So we're going to pull that open just slightly. Let me see if I can get the angle. There. So I've pulled it out just slightly. I'm going to do the same on the other side. There we go. Fair enough. Okay. And now we're going to try and pry these two sections apart from one another. There we go. That's better. So let's try and push this through. There we go. So that actually worked out nicely. Okay. So there are three pieces on the inside here that are of significance. There is a spring. Okay. So here's there. There's a spring. It's focusing on the wrong thing. How could I make this better? I'm not sure. There. Okay. There's a spring. So we're going to put the spring aside. So we've got three pieces of metal. There's three things in here. So we're going to take the first one out. This one, this piece right here, let's get a nice clear shot of this because this is important to see. This piece, this thing, is the thing that actually closes the circuit. So I'm going to rotate it slowly to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. But here's how it works. See this piece of metal that's bent outwards? Okay, let's see if I can show it here. This piece right here, actually my finger's huge and in the way, so give me a second. Where's my camera? Okay. This piece of metal right here. What happens is there is a flat piece of metal on the other side underneath here. And what happens is your Strumbar pushes this whole piece of metal. Okay. There. Might be easier to see this way. Someday I'll get a better camera. Okay, so what happens is the Strumbar pushes this piece of metal inwards. Okay, so this white piece of plastic here gets pushed inwards, and when it does, it pushes itself along this piece of metal here, here, and it pushes this in, which makes contact. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so it gets pushed in, makes contact, and that's a strum. What we want to do is we want to take these two little pins, and this is so small and so hard to see. Let me see if I can get more light in on this. These two tiny little pieces right here, these two pieces, those are what do the overstrum. And what I mean by that is I can actually feel this on my finger right now. When I push this inwards, I can feel when it's touching the tip of my finger. What we want to do is we actually want to bend these two pieces of metal towards my finger slightly, which means when you start pressing on the Strumbar, it'll make contact sooner than it would previously. I hope that makes sense. Maybe to explain it a different way, is these pieces of metal, if they touch my finger, it's considered a strum. Well, I want them to strum sooner. I want them to touch my finger more easily, which means if I bend them inwards and I strum, it'll be considered an overstrum. So I'm going to bend these pieces of metal down into my finger slightly. And this is so sensitive. Like, this is such a small, minute little change. There. So I've made a very, very, very tiny little change. Okay? Then, what we do is we put it back into the strum piece. So the way it fits, when we're looking inside, come on, focus. There we go. It fits right beside in here. Okay. Let me see if I can get light in there a different way. I'm actually going to take this whole thing apart in a second, just so you can see the entirety of it, because some people's things are broken. Some, they don't strum anymore, that kind of thing. So I'm going to take this all apart just so you can see the whole thing. So we're going to take this piece out, and this is the piece that we just manipulated the strum on, the bend. So I'm going to put that aside. There's another one. This is our contact panel. Oh, this one's really wedged in there. That one might not come out. It is going to come out. I'm making it come out. Okay. So this is our contact panel. This is also very, very, very small. Come on, focus camera. There we go. Ish. There. This contact panel is what the strum, not the strum bar, but this other piece, it's what the other piece touches to make contact and complete the circuit. There is also a third piece in here on the inside. This third piece is what makes the click. I've got a hold of it now. Okay. It's a piece of metal that looks like this. Here's what it looks like. Whoops, I didn't know this was magnetic. Okay, so basically what happens is the strum bar comes up. Where's my screwdriver? The strum plastic comes up to a certain point and hits this ledge. Oh shoot, you can't see that. Okay. There we go. The strum bar comes up, hits this ledge, and then pushes past it to give you that click feeling. Okay? So it goes up to this point and then pushes past it for the click. That's how you actually get the click, right? So when you're seeing this go up and down, okay, when this goes up and down, it's actually pushing past. So you have to insert it a very specific way. So if you look inside here, to get the click, we push this piece all the way in. And the more this metal is bent, the more aggressive that click is going to feel. If you want to barely feel the click, what you can do is you can just pinch this closed a little bit more. Right? You're basically bending the metal. Don't close it too much. So it's less aggressive, which means it's going to click less. It's not that it won't click any less so much as it's not going to be as aggressive when it does click. There we go. So we put this back in, and I can test it by holding this in place, and when I push past, yeah, see that I barely felt that click at all. Oops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and just stretch it out just a little bit more. There, just a bit. There we go. And I'll put it back in. Try and put it back in. And I'm just going to push on it. There. And you can hear it. You can hear that it goes click. Okay. So, whoops. That seems okay. Next thing are those two pieces of metal. We'll call them fingers. Whoops. These fingers are going to be pointing upwards. So we're going to put this one in first. This is the contact panel, and it goes as far back as it can. And you'll see there are kind of grooves in the plastic. That might be really hard to see. There are grooves. Let's see if I can get it to focus. There are grooves in the plastic where it sits inside of. When you're doing this in person, it'll be much easier to see. So we push that in, and it's securely in place. Move the cat hair out of the way. The next piece is, again, this Strumbar, or this is the strumming piece. And then finally, the third piece is our spring, and the spring just kind of fits right in the center. There's actually a spot inside of that white plastic for the spring to sit on top of. Dead center. Now, this strum mechanism is in the way, so I'm just going to put in the spring first, and then put in the clicking piece after. There. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, it's technically the bottom, we'll call it the top. I'm going to align these holes, these two holes on the top here. I'm going to align those with these on the top here. Make sure that they go through. There we go. And now, okay, so the click, not nearly as aggressive. So far, so good. I'm just closing it up for the time being. But now what I want to do is I want to test it. So I'm going to turn on my multimeter again, back to resistance mode. I'm going to hold these, and ideally, if I've done this correctly, what's going to happen is it's going to start measuring, it's going to close the circuit before this is all the way clicked in. So first I'm just going to test it to make sure it does work. If it's done correctly, it should actually register before the click. There. So, okay, so do you notice that? If you listen, pay attention really closely. I'm going to get this stupid camera to focus in a second here. There we go. If I push it in the right amount, it actually closes the circuit and then it clicks. Okay. There. If I push it further, it clicks. Now, you might be able to make it even more sensitive, and it's up to you on how much you want it. I've barely got it set up so that, like, it's a very, very subtle change, but it'll actually register a strum before the click happens. Now, I'm fine with this. It's up to you on how you want to have it done. You could have it so that it registers the click way, way, way sooner. Like you barely have to strum it, and so that it really, really overstrums quite easily. Just be aware, the downside to that is that you're going to have strums that will trigger when you don't want them to. So you have to be really careful, or really, really particular about your strumming technique. But this will get you the basic idea. Now, if you wanted to have overstrum in both directions, you just repeat the process on the other one. It's the same basic process. Now, one other thing that I wanted to show you is that the strum bar from underneath looks like this. Now, where this comes in handy, or where this is relevant, is that the click that you feel on the strum bar, there is no click here. This is a smooth movement. The click actually comes from the switches. So this switch, where it's much less aggressive than this one, what that means is when I'm strumming on the guitar, it's more likely to overstrum. It's less likely, it's going to have a more freer range of movement when it actually goes in either direction, which means whenever I'm strumming down and it comes back, the only thing that's stopping it is the resistance from this switch. So this switch, just by virtue of making it less clicky, is going to allow it to overstrum more as well. Okay. So now we have to go through the resoldering process. Now the good news is that it's only going to be able to be soldered on one way. Like you could do it this way, but then it's not going to line up, and it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So we're going to put it in the only way it will fit. Basically, get it as close to the PCB as you can, and you should see it's sticking out. Let me see if I can get a little bit closer view here. You should be able to see them sticking out on the sides there. So I've got my soldering iron, I've got my PCB, I've got my solder here. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to try and put this down. Actually, I could probably do it this way. This might actually make the most sense. So I know it's not going anywhere. I'm going to take one of these and just screw it in so it doesn't go anywhere. So I'm just reattaching the stabilization plastic piece. Now again, when you're soldering, something you want to be aware of is this stuff gets really hot. And you can melt the plastic here, as well as the plastic on the actual underside here, so just be careful. It's not going to break anything if it melts slightly, but you don't want it to stay there for too long either. Generally speaking, stuff on fire tends to be bad. That's the general consensus, I believe. So I want to put some flux on this so that it attaches. So I'm going to take my flux brush and my flux. I don't need nearly that much. I don't even need nearly that much. Okay, I just need a little bit here. There we go. That looks nice. There we go, that looks nice too. Almost like I knew what I was doing. Now, if you're really professional, you'd clean that stuff off with some sort of damp cloth or something. I don't have one. I guess I kind of do. So I'm just going to give it a quick wipe here. Next thing I'm going to do, let's go back to my multimeter. So multimeter time. We're going to test it one more time just to make sure that now that it's soldered that nothing has changed. Okay, so because we don't want any accidental grounds or anything like that. So what I'm doing is I'm basically checking to make sure that it's not triggering the circuit by not touching anything. If it did, then that would mean that there's some sort of contact probably in between these 2 points, between here and here. Oh, that's probably going to be hard to see, but yeah, so between this point and this point. But it doesn't look to be the case. So I'm touching, there's still full resistance, that's good. So we know it's this switch, so let me touch these together. Well, not together, but you know what I mean. I'm going to make contact with these. There's probably a better way. And now I'm going to click the switch and make sure that it actually responds. So according to my multimeter, it does. Yeah, looks good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back together. I'm going to take those 4 short screws. I'm going to unplug my soldering iron for the moment. I'm going to put these 4 screws back in. I've already got one, obviously, but let's do these other 3. There. Okay. So far, so good. Before I screw this back on to the mounting plates, I'm going to put these controls, or these ribbon cables back in. And you can't screw them up because they won't fit otherwise, so that's good. There we go. Good, good, good. Very good. Now, I'm not putting these in crazy tight. I'm just putting it in enough that it's not going to go anywhere. I'm not like cranking on to it super, super hard or anything like that. I'll fix the Strumbar in a second. Okay. Now, the awesomeness that I was talking about was this. This might be hard to see, but I can feel it. Okay. When I strum this way, it has a very definite click. When I strum this way, it's very, very nice and light. Which means when I strum this way and I let go, it snaps back to center, exactly how I want it. But when I strum up and I let go, it's a slow frame rate camera, but I can see it in person. It's actually going past center a little bit and then recentering. So it's going past center and recentering, which means this is very likely going to be overstrumming exactly how I want. And it might take a few attempts. Like, this is the kind of crappy part, is that it might take a few attempts to figure out exactly what you want it to be in terms of tolerance. And once you do it once or twice, you'll get an idea of how close it is. Okay. Let's put stuff back together. A second thing that you may want to consider doing. These pins and the neck on the 360 guitar, and actually all of them have this, they all have that removable neck thing. So what happens is, I guess technically this is upside down, but this would plug in and pushes against the neck, so you can remove the neck, so you can have it attached or not. Something that I've done on some of the other guitars is I've unsoldered all of these pins, taken the neck apart, unsoldered all of these pins, and just connected the ribbon cable directly, so the neck isn't removable. But what it does do is that it makes sure that all of your buttons will stay pressed no matter how much the neck wiggles. And it's nice with the Wii guitars because they don't have a whole lot of movement, but these 360 ones do. When you put them in all the way, there's a lot of give there. And I know I don't have the whole guitar together, but point being is that there's a little bit of that wiggle room, and that can cause disconnect. So you could be holding a chord down, like you could hold down, you know, whatever, and then all of a sudden your yellow button lets go because you move the guitar neck. So that's another mod that I've done on a few of my guitars, is I've just soldered all of the wiring directly to the neck, so the neck isn't removable, but it guarantees that you're going to have a solid connection. For the time being, this mod is done. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put the guitar back together, test it to make sure it's working, and go from there. Now, what some people might do is before they put in all of the screws, like I have a tendency to want to test things frequently. What you may want to consider doing is just putting in a few screws just so it's stable enough, and then put it together and actually test it right away before going too far with it. Otherwise, you know, things could be bad and you'll have to take it all apart again. It's a waste of time. I'm pretty confident with what we've done, and we haven't done anything really significant. So, oh, did I just put one in there? Yeah, I did. Okay. So, I'm going to go through, I'm going to put it all back together. I feel like it should probably work without much issue. Okay. So the next thing to do is to test this to see if it works. Alright, so we're going to give this a test. It may not be perfect, but the problem is my technique isn't perfect either. Yeah, my technique isn't perfect either, so that could also be an issue. Okay, shoot, I missed it, but that's fine. The dip went down a joint. Yeah, it's not bad. So another test that you can do is actually run it in the menu. So I didn't want it to overstrum when I strummed down and let go. Right, so if I strum down and let go, it seems fine. When I strum up and let go, see, it's somewhat inconsistent, so I might need to make it a little more sensitive. Yeah, I think that's maybe what needs to happen, is it just needs to be a little bit more sensitive, which means what I need to do is either, well, I'd have to open it all back up, take that one that I modified before, and make the spring less clicky, so it doesn't click as much. Alternatively, I would also be able to take those two pins and just push them a little bit closer so that it triggers even earlier. Yeah, so you can see that it's, if it were consistent 100% of the time. Also, my technique sucks, so there's that too. But at any rate, that's the whole process of what you do to get your guitar to overstrum. Just for comparison, actually, let me compare this against my Wii guitar, which I know works really well for. There. Use my Wii guitar, which works really well for overstrumming. Let's see if we can get this. Yeah, see, I just suck. Oh, what happened there? My blue button stopped. The devil went down to Georgia. My blue button isn't working. Maybe that'll fix it. Yeah, so the Wii guitar is definitely more consistent, but this one also overstrums in both directions. Not just up or down, right? So that's definitely something to consider when it comes to consistency. Now, one other interesting note is OBS is using some, CPU in the background, which has been making some of the notes stick as well. So they're like, when I've tried it without OBS, it seems more consistent. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But at any rate, it definitely seems like it's better than it was, because before I had to use the two-finger technique on my 360 guitar to get even close to what it's doing now. Now I can just use the single finger, and it works much better. So anyway, I hope you find that useful. I hope it helps, and if you have questions, feel free to DM me or respond on the Reddit thread, and I'll certainly help however I can. Thanks.